Stands on the spot, previous ones having been down, and it was effectively rebuilt within 30 years, which is unusual for a cathedral because usually it takes a long time to build them. But it does mean that it's built to programme. On the northern side of the cathedral, there are images that relate to the Old Testament and expecting Jesus. The West End is the end where we see the images about the coming of Jesus. A tree of Jesse window, a birth window, and a passion window, and outside the sculptures according with that. And then on the southern side, the side of the building that deals with the end time. And I want to read the sculpture to you. See what you make of this. Medieval Europe, round about the year 1220. All these images would, of course, be painted, and kings would have golden crowns and all the rest of it. It would look fantastic. But the years have worn things away. At the top, Christ in the middle sits in judgment. He has his hands raised in order that the marks of his crucifixion might be seen. On the left-hand side, as you look at it, his mother Mary intercedes on behalf of, of the world, and she is joined on the right-hand side by John, a traditional way of gathering people together. Above, there are angels in the heavens, and I can't expect you to identify such figures, but there are also angels who are playing harps and trumpets. It is the company of heaven in the vault above. Below the feet of Jesus stands the figure of St. Michael, who holds broken scales, for he is charged with the business of weighing souls as to where they might go. Below it, there is quite a tale being told. To the right-hand side of the image are the souls of the damned. If you look towards the right-hand side, you might, in the corner, just before those three figures on the right-hand side, you might see the jaws of hell opening up. This is where the damned are to go. The figures that line up have their fingers pointing downwards because that's where they're going to go. On the left-hand side, there are figures with their fingers pointed upwards. These are the righteous whose fate is secure. And below it are some details. The middle picture shows the righteous who are going to be all right when it comes to the matter of judgment. Can you see the three souls in the fold of Abraham's bosom? Right hand, if you look, can you see them? Three figures, safe in the bosom of Abraham. And other figures who are looking quite pleased with themselves that they have secured their eternal fate. Below are the figures of the damned, and these are quite grotesque. On the left-hand side, we see a figure with a lot of teeth and a second head in the middle of his belly. We see on the right-hand side, second in, a figure holding a money bag who has been convicted of the sin of avarice. And on the right-hand side, an even more grotesque figure of a lady who is being hung upside down over the shoulder of one of these figures. You see her long hair just sort of falling above one of these little castles. And of course the castles represent medieval charge. Now you might be saying, Rob, why are you showing us these figures? They are comic figures, ways of dealing with a very serious subject, undoubtedly images as a way of exercising control. If you pass through those doors, year in, year out, seeing these figures of judgment, they are meant to have some influence upon the way that you live your life. These figures concentrate the mind wonderfully because you want, as a medieval soul, to be on the side of the righteous, where your future is secure, rather than disappearing into the jaws of the Leviathan or whatever the monstrous figure is. These are cartoons, which I used to put over a great theme. And the theme, of course, is that of judgment, the centrality of judgment. Now, I have to tell you that these figures scare the living daylights out of me as a preacher, because I still think that in our addressing of some of the great themes of the Christian year, and in Advent we are dealing with the theme of judgment and hope and the last things and the parousia. I remember once listening to Colin Morris, one of the great preachers of Methodism a few years ago, even at my ordination conference, being invited to give the pastoral address on the subject, my 4 neglected themes in my preaching. And one of them was the parousia, another was judgment. So, three thoughts. Judgment is part and parcel of the nature of God. It's the sign of a moral universe. I think it's very important that God's judgments aren't just reserved, though, for the way of thinking about the end of time, but are continually taking effect. In Psalm 9, the Lord makes himself known, justice is done. In Psalm 105, he is the Lord our God, his judgment fills the earth. It seems to me that those are not simply about what will happen one day, but they are words about our contemporary setting. So the mighty acts of God, which have been seen already, are acts of judgment. My second thought is that judgment has happened in the past and is happening now, not simply about waiting for something to happen in the future. Judgment isn't about a remote decision that will be taken sometime in the future, in the court of heaven. You know the images in the book of Job about this court scene in heaven, where there's an argument going on about Job's capacity to cope with what's going on in his life. It's about God acting now. So that happening, if we are to see judgment as something which is not just past or future as present. I mean, John, with all your interest in ecology and what's happening to the world and how we treat it, is surely calling a world to judgment about the way that we are treating the planet. God is not going to intervene by changing the setting on the Earth's thermostat. We are the ones who've got to do it. Nuclear war will indeed destroy the planet unless we do something about it. And personally, in our individual lives, God's wrath may be seen as the consequence of our action. If I abuse my children, they will stop loving me, and nothing I do or say can undo the consequences of that abuse. I may atone for it, but the wrath, the mark of God, has already been left and cannot be removed. There is a consequence. So judgment is something which is present event as well. But finally, in this mini preachment, a final thought. And it is prompted out of the fact that each year we do have this season of Advent, which is not simply about anticipating the first coming, getting ready for Christmas and all that kind of stuff. Though it's perhaps easier for us as preachers to address that than it is, say, second coming. But judgment is a good thing. It's positive. But I don't think we're into the business of threatening people with the jaws of hell. I have to say I've been dangled over the pit by one or two fairly conservative presenters of the gospel and felt it distinctly uncomfortable. Back in 1966, I went to hear Billy Graham at Earl's Court. And I remember one night he preached a sermon with the subtitle, "Write Your Own Ticket for Heaven or Hell." And it was prompted by the tragic death of a film star the previous week, who had died rather gruesomely in a car crash. And I felt that night that his audience were being sort of dangled over the pit. Threatened, perhaps, is a more appropriate word. And the great thing is that as we approach all this, that we are not Calvinists, we are Arminian. Which is to say that we believe that salvation is something for all people in all places. It ought to be in our Methodist DNA that all people can be saved, and all people can be saved to the uttermost, and so on. Would Jesus have the sinner die? Oh, let thy love my heart control, thy love for every sinner free, that every fallen human soul may taste the grace that found out me, that all mankind with me may prove thy sovereign, everlasting love. So my concluding thoughts as we enter into perhaps a conversation about how we address this theme of judgment in an accessible way rather than threatening people with it, is that God doesn't intend that anybody should be lost. That's in our DNA as Methodists. That God is loving and compassionate. And if that is true, then preaching fear would not seem to me to be the priority, but to preach love. I fear that I've rendered you sort of